Hello, my name is Siriano for Brooklyn Hobbies, NYRC Live, and Team Mugen Northeast. Today we're going to show you how to install a clutch on an engine for a 1/8 scale on-road. Right now it's for a Mugen MRX5, and this is a 3-shoe clutch. We've already put on the flywheel. You want to make sure that you try to use the Novarossi cone or collet that comes with the engine. Usually the right size of getting a good clutch setup. If you find out that you've done your clutch with the Novarossi collet and you can't get no gap, even if you have no shims behind the thrust washer, you might want to search out some different collets that will bring the flywheel down a little bit lower so you can get more gap. So we've installed the Mugen flywheel, and we put on the flywheel nut. So we're going to continue from here. And this is a 3D or 3-shoe clutch from Mugen. We're going to use the flyweights that come with it. They have holes, and they go on the pins. Make sure that the hole in the shoe is big enough that it's not too small. It should go right on the pin, and it should drop down into the flywheel. You want to make sure that's not binding, but you don't want to make that hole too big that it slops around in there. Most of the time the flyweight will crack. So we put on the flyweights. We make sure that it sinks down into the bottom of the flywheel freely. Doesn't bind anywhere. So that's what it should look like. Alright, now we're going to put the pressure plate. The pressure plate is aluminum. They used to be steel. They found out they get better performance from the lighter weight pressure plate. But with that better performance comes a lot of chance for error. If you have one of these flyweights that get hung up or actually crack or whatever, and then 2 shoes will be pushing up on this plate more than the third flyweight, or centrifugal shoe, that's what they call it. And then what it'll do is it'll start to bend this. So this is very important that you check these pressure plates all the time when you're maintaining your clutch to make sure that they're flat, say on a piece of glass. If they bend, sometimes you don't see it, but your shoe will start wearing out prematurely on one side. Eventually you'll just have all kinds of problems with your clutch. So this is a brand new setup right here, so we know that's flat. And we'll put it on the pins, of course making sure that it's free when it goes on. And you have your clutch shoe. This is a Mugen yellow 3D clutch shoe. Same thing with the holes in the clutch shoe. When you put it on, you want to make sure it fits right on and there's no problems. That's not getting stuck. Once again, if you do feel a little binding, you can try to remount the hole just slightly that it fits on. But this is very, very free on here. You can toggle back and forth. It's the way it should be. So once you got that on there, you put the spring cup. This is going to sit down inside the shoe. We use an MSR spring for the Mugen clutch. Not sure if the new MRX5 comes with the MSR spring or it comes with a stock silver spring. We go a little more aggressive clutch spring at the MSR, Mugen MSR spring. When you put it on over the flywheel nut, you want to make sure that it's not catching the threads. If it gets any type of binding in there, your clutch is not going to work correctly. Some people take a Dremel, we go inside, we Dremel it around a little bit until when we put it on, it drops on free, both directions. It's on free. Once you've established that, take your flywheel nut, and the flywheel nut, what we do sometimes is we Dremel off the whole outside of the nut to bring it down just a little bit. The diameter between the clutch bell and the nut is very, very close. If you get any type of wobble in the clutch bell, it will touch against the nut and your clutch won't work right. So you can install it right out of the box. It's been done before. But if you have any issues, you can look inside the clutch bell and you will see that there's scratches inside there. If there's scratches inside there, that's from rubbing up against the nut and your clutch will not work correctly. So you can Dremel this whole nut all around the outside so it takes it down a few thousandths so you'll have clearance. But in any case, we'll put the nut on over the spring. Get it started on some threads. We use the Mugen spring nut tool. We go on, we tighten it down. want to see about a thread to start. Once again, it's all going to depend if you're using a brand new engine or an engine ready to race that's fully broken in. Okay, so now there's two ways to measure your spring tension. One is a digital tool from Carlson products. It's a digital tool. We place it on top, and we will get a reading of how far the nut is down from the top of the threads of the flywheel nut, and that will give you actual spring tension. Some people with Nova Rossi engines will measure from the top of the crankshaft down to the nut. This is just a starting point. You can do this, and normally we go down a starting point to about 9.50. Depending on your collet, depending on the crankshaft that's inside the engine, how it was made, could be off slightly. So we'll just measure this down just to give you an idea. And we want to get this down to about 950. $952. It's good enough for now. Okay, so 952. That's a general setting on a Nova Rossi engine. Anywhere from 950 to 10 with an MSR spring on a 3D clutch. Now, you can measure the actual spring tension from the top of the threads of the flywheel nut to the top face of the clutch spring nut. And how you do that is by using the back of the caliper. You might have seen this before on some other videos. It's a good way to check it. And you put this part down on the nut first. Get your flat spot, get it flat. And then you proceed to push this down until it touches the top of the flywheel nut threads, and that will give you your reading. So at a 9.50, doing it in this method will come up to about 1.50 of spring tension. Once again, the spring tension is going to be adjusted to the track. This is just a starting point. If you ever hear your clutch slipping, you might have too much spring tension, or the gap might be too far away, so you're going to have to adjust it. You know, engines are expensive today. You want to make sure if you hear slipping, then you stop your motor and investigate the clutch and find out what's going on. Okay, so once we got our spring tension, now we're going to go to the clutch bell. If you're using, of course, a new clutch bell, out of the box you have to put on the gears, your gears of choice. Mugen makes a nice tool. Other manufacturers also make it. We have the Mugen tool. The clutch bell sits on top of it, and you stick pretty much an Allen key or something through. That's going to lock it on so it can't move. Then you're going to take your gear and screw that on. Some people will use just a dab of Loctite. It's not necessary if you wrench it down pretty tight. Normally they don't come off. Then we look for the other half of the Mugen tool. The Mugen tool is set for the gear. You put it on, give it a little tug, and that's good enough to lock that one on. And you get your first gear. Make sure on the Mugen it has a little, it's got a little flange there. That's got to go down to separate the first and second gear. So don't put it on the opposite way, otherwise your gears aren't going to line up when you put the engine in. So we put this on. Take the other half of the tool again. And find the right size. Wrench it down. And that's it. You'll have space in between the two gears. And that's the way the Mugen runs. Some of the other manufacturers, they run pretty close together, but this has this gap in there. Okay, so now we have our clutch bell, and we have bearings, and we have thrust bearings. So what we're going to do is first we're going to build the outside of the clutch and check for the gap. The gap will be how far the shoe has to travel. Under spring tension, we'll call this 0. And when you accelerate the engine, the flyweights come out, push the shoe up, and going to hit the clutch bell. Where the clutch bell is at its furthest distance, when the shoe's going to lock in, that's the gap. and this car calls for a 7 to 0.7 to 0.8. I recommend keeping at the 0.7 when you have a new shoe. Once you have the new shoe at 0.7, after you run a few tanks and break the clutch in, it should be at 0.8. So what we do to check that is we're going to put the bearing in the top, and then you're going to build your whole thrust assembly from the top, leaving the bearing out from underneath the clutch bell. That will assure that the flywheel nut is not obstructing the clutch bell or bearings inside the clutch bell from reaching its from reaching all the way down and up. Okay, so we have the flywheel stopper, the clutch bell stopper. The screw goes in between there, and we build this up with shims to adjust our gap. We want to get about a 0.7. This is a new shoe. So we'll start off with maybe 2 spaces. Then we go to the thrust washer. We have the thrust washer, and we have the thrust bearing. We have 2 thrust washers. One hole is bigger than the other hole. It's about 520. That's 5 millimeters. This one should be about 520. 520. So the bigger hole will go down into the clutch bell first, which would make the smaller hole one go on the stopper first. And then we'll take the thrust bearing, put that on next, and the bigger hole thrust washer. And that's all set up. We put it on top of the bearing. And we will tighten up the clutch bell. And see how much gap we have. And what we're going to want to do is we want to make that gap a 0.8, 0.7 if it's a new shoe. Alright, that's the end of part 1. And in part 2, we're going to go over the rest of the adjustments on the engine and finishing up your clutch. Richard Siriano for NYRC Live, Brooklyn Hobbies, and Team Mugen Northeast.